So today you're going to hear a story, my story actually, from joining a small startup, namely mySugr, more than 10 years ago, and joining a bit of corporate, namely Roche Diabetes Care, 5 years ago, and I'm going to reflect on that. So who am I? My name is Christian. I studied software engineering, so I have an engineering background. Joined mySugr in the early days. We've been one team, 7, 8 people, something like that, in the verification. So I was software testing, but soon started to focus more on how we work, how we do things. So you could say more in the agile ways of working, Scrum Master role. And then with the exit, so 5 years ago, I started to build up a department of agile coaches, so people who shape the culture, the way of working, empower people. And yeah, that's basically the roles I have and had. And from October 1, I'm going on educational leave, and we'll take some time to reflect and rest. And I talked to Robert, and he told me, well, that would be nice to share with a broader audience. What's your journey? What did you learn? And what you think could be also interesting for others? And that's the reason why I'm here today. Having that said, something that worked for mySugr or Roche Diabetes Care at one point in time doesn't mean that it will work for you in your context, nor do I own the truth of the story. So I try to be as objective as possible, make a step back, look from the outside, but obviously I was part of the system that I'm talking about. So I have, of course, also my point of views. Everyone will have a different story. I even see people who work or worked at mySugr or applied for it, so super interesting also from the audience. In the end of the talk, there will be around 10 minutes for Q&A. But if there's a question that is so urgent because you cannot follow the talk and you cannot wait until the end, just raise your hand, and then I will also be able to answer it right away. Yeah, I tend to talk fast when I'm nervous, so maybe already now a bit. So I asked Tanya to do like that. If I run too fast, and everyone else who thinks, Christian, slow down, cool down, just give me this wave, and I hope I will breathe and slow down a bit. So let's get it started. What do most people know when we talk about mySugr? It's a mobile application for at least the people who use it. So it's an application on Android and iOS. Fortunately, we have many users who love it, and it helps you with your therapy. I think that's enough for it. People who don't work in software engineering or in, let's say, in industries that you're familiar with sometimes ask me, what, you make a mobile application and you keep 170 people busy? Valid question, I have to say. I also ask myself that, but yeah, we are global, which means we're in many markets worldwide. We actually create medical products, which means these are medical devices, so different regulations in different markets, and it's one application that also looks different on the type of diabetes you have, also in which country you are, and which setup do you use for your therapy. So that's why I think there's a lot of complexity in the background. I will cluster this talk into 3 phases that I think mySugr and Roche can be seen at. And the first phase I'm going to talk about is the startup phase. So what do I mean with startup phase? You feel like you are in a small motorboat, you change directions quickly, you try out new things. Roles, responsibilities actually don't matter because they change anyway all the time. People just take opportunities, and in the end, you try to find a product market fit. So that's what it's all about. You need to find people liking your products, and someone in the end paying for it. So that's what I would say the startup phase is around. So we started with a, let's say, better logbook, a digital logbook. We tried to add a lot of gamification with it. Soon after that, we started to work with hardware because we realized that you can get much more out of your therapy if you have valid data. So we started to integrate glucose meters where you measure your blood glucose. With our applications, we reached 500,000 users 3 years after we founded the company. Then we thought, okay, we also want to support the people between the doctor visits, so we added a coaching service where people can reach out to a diabetes coach, so a healthcare professional, on a daily basis and exchange and have basically feedback loops besides the doctor visits. So we were never there to replace the doctor, but to actually help you in the time between. And 2017, so in the startup phase, we had investors, several investors. Roche was one of it. And 2017, we got acquired, which means 100% of mySugr, the shares went to Roche Diabetes Care. And that is what I call the phase acquisition and get to know each other. The first 3 years after the acquisition, I would consider mySugr being as independent as possible. I will talk about this later, which means we built up in Vienna all functions, be it regulatory, legal, marketing, of course, product development. So everything was in our bubble. And we had, of course, some touch points to Roche Diabetes Care, but not yet, I would say, an integration. In that phase, we've been able to globally expand, so we reached way more users and countries with the support of Roche because they are basically operating worldwide, and suddenly we had access to marketing people in all different kinds of countries, legal support, and so on. So we had a global expansion. We started to work more and more with insurances. The idea was that the people with diabetes don't need to pay for the app or for our service, but it's actually reimbursed. So we started to work more and more with public and private insurances. And something we are very proud of, a bit more than a year ago, we were able to steer, or we are now able to steer an insulin pump, so something that you inject insulin with the mobile phone, so a way more complex and also more risky product than compared to logbook 10 years ago. So there are various changes down the road, and the last phase, and I don't know how it ends, because we are basically in it, it started 2 years ago, is the integration. And when I talk about the integration, I mean two things. So the one is the integration into the departments. So all departments became global departments. So Roche Diabetes Care has 4 sites. One is Vienna, and you have basically a department with colleagues from other sites as well. So several people from Vienna became global heads, others got new bosses. So that's one thing with the integration that I referred to. And the other thing is also we thought about how do we align our ways of working. And that is where SAFE comes into place, and this is what I will focus in this talk about. So focus about is actually superpowers. So I think as an organization, there are things that you can be proud of, things that you develop over the time, and that you get super strong at, and they are becoming the DNA of the company. So it's already a habit, and no one will question it. And it's super strong. And we identified, I think a year ago, a bit more a year ago, things that we consider superpowers that we developed the first 7-8 years of existence, and that we think can help the broader organizations, or something we will actually would like to scale into the broader organization. So this is what I'm going to talk about, superpowers, something in the DNA of the company with the potential of an impact on the broader organization. So let's make a step back, startup phase. So 10 years ago, mySugr was founded, or 11 already, something like that. And in the startup phase, in the first 5 years of the company, I'm talking about scaling up from 4 founders to around 45 people. So that's the phase we are talking in. And as mentioned, this is the phase where you navigate fast, you learn fast, and also where you need to find a product market fit. So this is the startup phase. And why did we actually start the company, or why was the company started? Let's face it, diabetes sucks. It still does, and I guess it will do in the future. So I think there's still a reason for us to be around as mySugr and Roche Diabetes Care. But it sucked even more 10 years ago. So the tools out there were either manual, so literally pieces of paper. The applications, the mobile application just started to get into the App Store. Crappy user experience, super cold. So we wanted to really change the game there. We wanted to make it easy to log your therapy data, to learn from it, to remove the awful communication that was around diabetes there. So we wanted to change that. So that was the reason for founding mySugr. And we wanted to be digital, obviously, because that was the time for it. And yeah, I was in the first talk today in the morning, and I think Waze was mentioned. So Waze was a startup that was acquired at one point of time by Google. And I read a blog post, I think one of the founders, but I don't remember. And it was for me really life-changing, or really realizing something, because he wrote about the difference before the acquisition and after. And what he mentioned is, he said, you are at the early stage of a company. Roles and titles don't matter. You don't anyway don't have job security, so you have other things to worry about. But what you really care about is the product. And it's super easy to get this right. Why? Because you do something in a team of 7 and 8, you launch it, and you immediately get feedback. With immediately, I mean maybe a couple of days, maybe weeks, but you see what you build works or doesn't work. So it's quite easy as an individual or as a team to get satisfaction from that. And that obviously changes the bigger an organization gets. I don't think it's related to, is it corporate or not. you're building a bigger product, more people are developing on it, and the feedback loops are different. It's not that easy anymore to get this. So in the early stages, feedback loops were there, and I think in the early stages, in the startup phase, many things of the culture that I think we have a very strong culture that we have developed there. And I will get started with that. So those are the 4 guys that founded mySugr, and I think it's worth showing them because I think this was the first cross-functional team we had. And I think that was a very good thing for a starting point. So we had Fredrik here on the left, basically a visionary, knowing the whole startup scene in Vienna, living with diabetes, really knows which kind of problems he wants to solve, and always 10 years ahead. Always 10 years ahead, and that's super strong. Next to him is Gerald. Gerald is a designer, incredibly good in establishing a brand, knowing about brand, and caring a lot about agility and enabling people. So this is great. And also Gerald, I would like to mention, he set one example because I mentioned early things you do in a startup stick around, or it's easy that they stick around. So Gerald, in the founding phase, as a founder, went on parental leave for 2 or 3 months at that point in time, which was not normal, I would say, in general in Austria, unfortunately, also not in the startup scene that a founder goes on parental leave. And after that, it became basically normal that everyone at mySugr, a man, went on parental leave. I'm not saying we have gender equality here, unfortunately, by far not. But in the end, he set the baseline. So that's what you get for sure. You don't even need to negotiate on that anymore. And I want to say that things you do as a founder will really shape the culture of the company. That's what I wanted to highlight here as one example. Next to him, Michael, also incredibly dedicated to agile ways of working, to company culture, and great in all regulatory and medical areas. And he was really good in translating standards that were written 20 years ago into a way of working that fits us in the time we're in. And next to it is Frank, the CEO at that point in time, and also co-founder, also living with diabetes and a high business focus. So that's what you call basically a cross-functional team as a start. And we always wanted to avoid that. So you might know it, some person has an idea or even a to-do list, throws it to someone and magically hopes it will solve all the problems and the solution will be delivered and customers will be happy. And we always wanted to avoid it, but honestly speaking, it's so easy to fall back to that. So that happens really fast, and you really need to proactively, constantly remind yourself, that's not what we want. Why don't we want it? First of all, I don't think it's fun to work in such an environment. I don't think the outcome is good. And in the end, it doesn't scale either. So I think there are good reasons to not do it. Even so, as said, we had times where we also had this behavior. So we really looked at how do we want to scale a company. And I mean, at a conference like that, I think it's obvious you make small agile teams. Small means 7 people, plus minus 2, but actually more minus 2 than plus. So rather go for 4 people than for 9 people. Small product teams with end-to-end responsibility, and that's a term that is so much used, and I think everyone has a different understanding, but what we meant and what I mean with end-to-end responsibility, a team that can come up with ideas, transform it into user needs, talk directly to users, write the specifications, implement it, including the user interface, verify it, bring it to the market, maintain it on the market, and learn from it, including documentation. So everything that is needed. So that's what we always were striving for, which means a lot of responsibility and a lot of knowledge you need for a couple of people. So that's not easy to get. And yeah, that was always what we wanted to do. So for that, typically you have, of course, engineers, someone responsible for prioritization, representing the user, call it a product owner, someone responsible for the processes and interaction, agile coach. In the first 5 years, it was always a double role. So I've been in a double role with quality assurance and agile coach. Others were developers, so this was always shared. We changed that later. A designer, and that was basically, and are still, the cross-functional teams. We knew that culture is essential, but we also wanted, I think everyone at the early phase wanted a company to shape the company like that you enjoy working there. So I think that's what we wanted. And we had a hackathon once, and Clara, one of our now product managers, at that point in time, she was an intern, she said, that's so great what happens here in cultural aspects, and she started to write down basically the story of the company, including the culture. And that is super strong. That developed into this little green book, 7, 8 years old, we gave at that point in time every employee, but it was super nice because it summarized the principles, the history, the people, the products, also products that we started and threw away, but we somehow put energy and our love in it, so we basically documented it. And that is super strong. So when I read it now, I had a look at it recently, I think how the book describes the culture at that point in time, and I think it's still representative, is it's a very quality-driven culture, very user-focused, approachable and casual and transparent, and as I mentioned, team-focused. So that's how it is described. We also managed to attract many people with diabetes. So we had roughly every fourth employee was a person living with diabetes. So that also helps to have the user in the center. First 5 years of the company, from 4 to 45 people with the exit then, those are the superpowers that I think are worth sharing. First and foremost, user centricity. So we always try to put the user into the center. And as said, we had many people with diabetes in the company. So you had people using the products. But that's great, but also you need to be careful with that because they're a subgroup, you know, they are not representing the whole world. They are not everyone with diabetes is working at the diabetes company and is used to digital products. So we forced ourselves, and I really have to say forced because I was having a lot of fights to really get user interviews done, to get people with diabetes joining the company, people who are not product owners or user researchers doing user interviews. It's not easy, but it pays off. And I think if you are a developer and you do it, most of the developers really liked it and do it from time to time, and there are huge learnings there. So that, I think, with user centricity. And we had, until we had 50 people in every team, a person with diabetes, point. That was set. And I remember a developer once said to me, I don't know, after 2 or 3 years of mySugr, he said, you know, I'm not coming here for the salary because honestly, we don't earn here that much as would earn someone else. I also don't work for our CEO, but I work for Marlies, the product owner with diabetes, because when she looks on what I code and she smiles, I know why I'm here. And I think that's super strong if you have people, potential customers also in the company. And they started something super powerful. They started to share the diabetes success stories. So every week we have a weekly show and tell, town hall, basically the whole company coming together. And they were sharing very personal stories about what sucks with living with diabetes. I mean, there were tears in the audience, not only once. And they really shared stories. And you imagine you join a company, you sit there the first week, and someone shares a super private story, and you know, okay, there are real problems out there, and we're here to solve them. So that is super powerful when it comes to user centricity. We also place the customer support in the center of the company, literally sitting surrounded by product teams, because those are the people who talk to the customers out there and get the feedback and have the problems with all the bugs. So having close connection there was also something that we invested in. The second point, which I think is not that uncommon in startups, basically learn and adapt. I mean, you need to do it, otherwise you die as a startup. But what I think that was really important, that we started a habit of retrospectives. So every team did a weekly retrospective point. But more, when we had several teams, we did team-of-team retrospectives. Whenever something went wrong, we made retrospective on what went wrong. Like the whole company came once together when we wanted to develop. We made a rewrite of the whole code. I don't recommend, or at least my experience is not good. And we thought we're gonna do this in 3-4 weeks maybe. And it took us 3 months, which was a disaster for us at that point in time. I mean, we could literally run out of money if you know. And we didn't realize how did this happen. So the whole company came together for a whole day reflecting on how did it happen that it took us so long, and that we actually went into this, in that case, I would say a waterfall approach. So this was the time when we decided we want to release, no matter what comes, our product bi-weekly, and it will cost us energy when it comes to automation, when it comes to documentation, training, but we will do that, and we still do. So early things also stick. Besides retrospectives on every level, we introduced health check. So 3 to 4 times a year, we asked every employee questions, so they could answer it anonymously or not, with Google Forms, basically, qualitative and quantitative. So to also have data, because retrospectives were always face-to-face, super fruitful, but also to get it, you know, sit back, write down your feedback, and then it's shared, and we find people in the company who fix it. So the learn and adapt was very important. And last but not least, a superpower I would like to highlight from the first 3 years that actually is now multiplied to the broader organization, but not that sexy, I have to say, digital quality management system. So many companies, or at least I think really most of the companies here have some quality standards, be it because they are in banking, be it they are in telecommunication, whatever it is, you need to apply some standards because you want safety or security, whatever it is. So the question is always, how does it fit with agility, and how those standards got translated? So what I think what we did right is that we said, whatever we do, the processes in the quality management system, they are written and maintained and improved by the people who do the work. Not some random dude from a department is writing the work instruction for our software developers. No, it's a software engineer who does it with others. So the software engineers decide, do we do code reviews? If so, how? How do we document it? So we always put the people who do the work in charge of the processes and work instructions, and that requires work. You need to study the standards. You know, you often hear, yeah, it's not possible, it's a medical device. And then you ask and you realize nobody read the standard. I mean, you need to do your homework for that. But then it's super powerful. So also you need to get a tool set that helps you in that. So we decided on 5 essential tools that we heavily used for the whole development process, namely Jira for software development, requirement management, Confluence, which is for process description, work instructions, documenting how we do things. So it's basically a wiki. And then we had Google Drive to document the artifacts. And in the beginning was Dropbox, I think, but it doesn't matter. Then GitHub for code reviews, hosting the code, all those things, and TestRail for verification. And the tools are highly interlinked. So you can literally go from an idea to the specification, to the test case. So you can click through the tools, and this is very important. Not all tools are really built for this usage, I would say. So there are professional tools out there, but we tweak them in a way, and it's standard tools, and people are used to it, so we saw a huge benefit in it. What we always tried is that it reflects the workflow that people create, reflects the actual work. You know, the worst thing is you do something and 2 months later you need to document it for some kind of auditor or because someone needs an artifact. Yes, that can also be the case, but we always try to build the workflows in a way that you produce the artifacts while doing. So if someone does a code review, you basically say code review done in GitHub, and that is later when you say export documentation, export it. Person XY did this code review on this date. Perfect. You have everything you need. So we always try to automate as much as possible, but it's a time investment. All right. First 5 years of mySugr, and then came the acquisition. And I will talk about this phase, so the acquisition itself, and the first 3 years of the acquisition. So Roche is a big company, a really big company. It has the most famous one, I think, is the pharma branch. Then there is a diagnostics branch, and within diagnostics is Roche Diabetes Care. So this is what I refer to when we talk about Roche. Still, I think, a couple of thousand of employees, so it's still a big part. And Roche Diabetes Care has and had a very good track record of creating hardware products for people with diabetes. So glucose meters, test strips, insulin pumps. So very good at that. From a ways of working, they started recently, I think 1 year before the acquisition, they started a bit with agile, started the first experiments there, but they had a completely different approach. So release cycles in years, versus we were releasing every other week. We were coming from digital only, they were coming from paper signing. And as said, we are digital product development and they were hardware development. But what we saw is that our strategy actually fits, because when you look at products nowadays, at least the great products, they bring hardware and software together and you don't even realize the difference. And we also saw this for us at mySugr, that we needed that, and Roche needed a partner. So basically, reason for the acquisition, and the idea was, at least in the beginning, and then let's see how it works, keep mySugr as independent as possible, build up the brand, be the patient-facing interface of Roche Diabetes Care, which means go into all the markets Roche is in with our application, replace some applications they had already out there. So that was the goal there. And keep the culture and way of working, because we were too different at that point of time, I would say. What changed for the people? So in the beginning, not that much. I mean, we had the opportunity to grow. That was the most visible things. So we suddenly said, okay, we are now 45, we're going to scale up to 100 or 200 people in 2 years. So that changed. Job safety changed. Suddenly we had jobs that were safe, not the case before. And also compensation changed. So there were many things that changed besides that we were able to reach more people. But we also saw, okay, what is our position in the bigger corporate? What is our expectation? What is our vision? So there are many things. And what we did is we brought, I think in total, half of the company was in those exercises. We made a culture map. So we looked at the current culture at mySugr and we said, what are the blockers and enablers for us? To which behavior do they lead and what's the outcome? And we had a look at that and realized, okay, we need to change something if we really want to scale up. We need to develop a new clear vision of mySugr when it comes to what's our part in the bigger corporate, what's our part to the users, which kind of customer groups do we want to target, but also how do we want to work. So we knew we need a new vision. We also knew we need to create a structure because having a company is 45 people, alignment, transparency is a completely different thing if you want to have a company with 150, 200 people. You need to be ready for that. And we also knew we need to hire and empower great people. And that was in the startup phase. Yes, we had hiring processes, we had people joining, but it was also often, I call the guy because I know from university, he was great and you get him. You need to change that if you want to really scale up. So that also changed. And yes, we also saw the first bus factor thing. So we had individuals who had a lot of knowledge, and if they would have been gone for whatever reason, hit by a bus, hopefully not, vacation, sick leave, whatever it is, or leaving the company, we would have a problem. And we wanted by any matter avoid that. So we set up the structure for the first 3 years. And the idea was that mySugr, so the mySugr application becomes the interface for Roche when it comes for digital products. And the mySugr CEO reported directly to the CEO of Roche Diabetes Care and was part of the leadership team. They basically made a strategic alignment. I think every quarter they met, so you had yearly alignment, we got a budget, and we worked with that. Of course, down the road, there were some adjustments, but this was the main link between us and the broader company. There were additional links, but not that many. Most of the links were with marketing, because Roche had marketing worldwide, and they were the first ones who have a lot of touch points and a bit of business development. But besides that, we build up all the functions internally, as I mentioned, all the departments, the salary structure, so all those things, the tools we used, infrastructure, not touched in the first 3 years. And we scaled up to 150 employees, but if you would count in freelancers and companies that are contracted, but in the end would be really like seen as colleagues because they are working for us for years, 170 people. And we had a look on how do we actually scale up? How do we scale this company? And we had some look at less and at safe at that point in time. I don't know, after a day we said no. I don't remember the reasons, but it just didn't feel right. And at that point, so also Spotify recently published the paper of the white page paper about, I don't know how it's called, engineering culture or something like that, so the tribes and all those things. So we reached out to the Spotify guys, we did workshops, we tried to understand what they read, why they did things, and translated it to basically our needs. So we started to establish tribes when we grew, with our own roles and responsibilities, but we took a lot of inspiration from Spotify and also from the references. So tribal unity was basically our Bible at that point in time. And we also looked at values. So I'm a big fan of the manifesto. I think it's still a great piece of art, actually. But there is something called modern agile. And for us, this was super interesting because they went a step from software development that you have principles of agile principles that fit for a whole company, not only developers or development teams. And they have 4 principles, and I want to mention one to highlight what is super powerful with modern agile, or what we like and liked a lot is the principles can be read internally and externally. So there's the one that is called make safety a prerequisite. And you can say safety for users, for customers, fits for us perfectly because we create medical products. But also safety for employees. You know, safety is the prerequisite that you are really, that you can live up and that you can deliver stuff. You know, you need to have a safety there. So it fit there. We also looked at Sociocracy 3.0. And especially, so that's a tool set of all kind of things, and especially the circle concept of delegating decision power was something that we took from there with consent decision making. It's a really cool framework, so we took that. And later on, we added 3 flight levels. So we did workshops with Klaus Leopold, so flight levels in common. So we combined this, wrote our own roles, included it in the quality management system, all those things. And that worked quite well, but also not always. So we also ran into delivery problems. I'm not sure, was it the framework or the setup we chose? What is the growth? Also Corona came, so it's super hard to actually find the real root causes for things, but we saw we had problems during the years. And we also saw whenever we worked together with colleagues from Roche, not whenever, but many times it was not easy. And the language was different. You know, what we call a product owner, a product manager comes in completely different. And you have incredible misunderstandings on who decides what and when. And we've been used to, you know, ship bi-weekly and maybe have a plan for a quarter, but the plan was with like outcome goals, like OKRs, you know, and suddenly someone asks you, what do you launch next year in April? And you were like, we don't know. Maybe we can tell you what is in 3 weeks. And this is a problem. I mean, it's funny, but it's for none of the both sides, it's actually good because somehow you need to work together. So we saw first symptoms of that. And yeah, that happened. But a bit of a step back, we found great people in this period. And we also understood if we want to scale up the company, we need to treat the employees also like customers. So they are the people we need to serve as a company. And we need to serve them also in the ways of working. So what we said, we are good in product development. We're going to find an office and treat it like a product. Customers, employees, so we did user interviews, surveys, observation, how do they actually cook, what do they use in the kitchen. And we found a small team that was responsible for building the office. And we invited the people to literally tear down the walls. I mean, we did not do the construction work, but the whole concept was there. We have a product owner and still do changes to the office like a product. What I want to show here is we always were searching for people who are hands-on. You know, that's what we wanted. We wanted people who get their hands dirty. And we were searching for that, especially in that phase. What were the superpowers from the phase, from the acquisition, from 45 people to, let's say, 150 people that I would like to highlight? The first one is, I think we established an incredibly hiring and onboarding process. What do I mean with that? So what we did is, whenever we searched for a role or a job, we had a small group of people responsible for this job. They first wrote down what do we actually search for, from an experience level, from a skill level, from a mindset level. So they were searching for, writing this down. What are we searching for? The next question is, how do we actually check this in an interview process? So who can see if the mindset is right? What does it mean? So we wrote this down, then translated it to a job description, posted it, had a clear hiring process with standardized questions we asked, but also with open conversations. And everyone who was in the hiring process had to write basically after the interview down yes or no with an explanation. What did I like about the candidate? What did I not check and should have checked? What I didn't like? What are my open questions? And then referring to basically 15 categories we wrote down before. Did I see that? Did I not see that? And had to say yes or no without knowing what the colleague was saying, to not bias each other. So that's the idea. And then after the whole process, the team comes together and they make a decision. So in many cases, the department head was part of those hiring teams, but the decision was not a department head decision, it's a team decision. And in doubt, no. If one has doubt, it's a no. Unfortunately, and I think we lost many great applicants with that, but on the other hand, we were super sure that everyone wants to work with them. So that's a hiring process. And we also knew during the hiring process what the potential joiner would like to learn, what the strengths is. And we also knew our expectations. And this was something we wrote down. And then we handed over to someone that is called the personal lead, which is someone responsible for the onboarding on the job, but also the career development on the long run. And so everyone who joined had a personal lead and the buddy more for the informal stuff, like where's the coffee machine, who is this dude everyone talks about. You know, all the questions you don't know whom to ask, maybe not your boss, but you need to ask it. So we established that and linked it basically to the onboarding. And I think that is super powerful. Also, we we added something to our feedback culture. I mentioned before, retrospective were already a habit, not questioned, and I think with a lot of good outcomes. But we added 360-degree feedback in person. You can see here on the left, and the difference here was not how did we do as a team or what went wrong in this project, but actually how do others, my peers, my supervisors, whoever, so a distinct group of people, how do they reflect on my behavior? Because that's a different kind of feedback. So we had those 360-degree feedback sessions established, and that helped a lot. And we started with performance feedback. I think half of the company read a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. Excellent book, everyone fell in love, and many things in there we actually translated to our ways of working, including quality management system, what I mentioned before, because we always thought the quality management system should reflect the reality. It shouldn't be two worlds. So we also wrote things from Radical Candor in there and why we do it and why we think it creates safer products. All right, another example that I would like to share here when it comes to feedback is, I mentioned before, we needed a new vision after the acquisition. And what we did is we talked to many people, wrote it down, and shared it. Here you can see Anton and Frank at that point in time, COO and CEO, sharing with the whole company the vision and asking 3 questions that everyone had to answer anonymously on the mobile phone. First question is, do you understand it, and do you understand the why? Doesn't matter if you like it or not, do you understand it? And then you had to go from totally yes to totally no. The second question is, do you agree with it? Do you think it's the right thing to do, and will it get you out of bed in the morning? So that's the second question. And the third one is, do we actually think it's achievable? And we went from the first one and saw people don't really understand. So you went into a discussion, fishbowl. So we went through this, got a lot of questions during the discussion, went back, rewrote the vision, next week, same game again. So this was a 3-time approach. And then we had a vision where we knew people understand the why. People agree that it's the right thing to do. At least they say, yes, it won't harm, I will support. And then they also said, yes, and actually I think we can achieve it. And only if you have those 3 things, I think you have buy-in. We also use this, by the way, for agreeing on OKRs. So that's a super powerful tool, I think. Which leads us to the phase 3. I already talked about some problems that we had with the scaling. We had some people that built up our self-made scaling model who left the company, so there was a lot of knowledge loss also. Corona started, so there were many things in change, and we saw that there were problems, especially when we had to work together, and we wanted to bring hardware and software together. So we as Roche Diabetes Care, we wanted to address this proactively, and we said, okay, how do we do that? And this was then basically the integration phase. What we did is we wrote down what kind of challenges that we see. And I already, here you can see SAFE for the first time. We wrote down what are the problems in our structure, which means tribes, flight levels, modern agile principles, and so on. So we wrote down what are the problems we want to solve. And the problems were, we saw that we started to have silo symptoms. I wouldn't say we had silos in the company, but you could already see first symptoms. So we wanted to become a lean organization. We wanted to improve the time to market. We realized that some products we built before we were used to weeks to get it to the market. We had a product that took us more than a year. We wanted to change that, and we wanted to be more predictable as an organization again. So those were the problems we wanted to solve, and the collaboration with the bigger organization, with Roche Diabetes Care. So we wanted to solve that, and we wanted to see it with the employee satisfaction. So basically, we wanted to increase the employee satisfaction. And then I had a look at SAFE, because I knew, okay, some people in Roche are doing SAFE. So for us, the question is at mySugr, do we tweak our current model, or do we move towards SAFE? I thought, okay, there are other scaling models out there, but let's keep them out, because if there's a scaling model, the most likely one and the easiest sell for Roche will be then if it's the same one. So what we did is we wrote this down, and 5 years ago, I read the first SAFE book, and I was like putting it in the shelf and never looked at it again. I don't remember the reasons, but that was how it was. But I thought, okay, I read this Tribal Unity book, and it's written by M. Campbell Pretty from Pretty Agile, and I really think she has a great mindset. So what she talks about in this book really, really changed the way that we worked at mySugr, and suddenly I realized she's working in the whole SAFE community, she's doing trainings. can't be that wrong, so I need to give it a shot. So what we did is we made workshops with Em. I asked all the questions, all the rumors I heard about SAFe. She explained a lot. We did value stream mapping, as it's called in SAFe. So how could the tribes we had at that point in time at mySugr look at agile release trains? What are the similarities? And in the end, we wrote down pros and cons, and we said, actually, I think SAFe can help us with some problems we have. And we saw the opportunity that if we change up mySugr, and we thought we are anyway good at changing, and the mindset, the principles, the values, not that different, size of an agile release train and tribes, not that different, you plan together, not that different. So there were many of those moments. And then we thought, okay, then we have the opportunity for the broader organization to also push to go towards SAFe. Then we share the same vocabulary, and it will be much easier to plan together. Another thing that was for me an important change is the development of SAFe they did in the last 5 years, namely the lean portfolio management. So they really had now articles writing about how to connect strategy, budgeting, a big topic, and product development. And that is something we never got right at mySugr. And I thought, like, okay, there are people writing about it, there are trainings. So that was basically the reason. Having that said, if you look at that for the first time, if you were a mySugr employee, not sexy, point, or overwhelming, whatever it is. But if you study it, or at least for me it was, I realized actually it's not that different. And then you see that. And I mean, that's the full integration we go for the portfolio. But yeah, on the other hand, I'm talking about in Roche Diabetes Care, more than 500 people affected. And if you want to work together, hardware and software, I mean, it's not that every team can decide on their direction for the next 3 years. You need to talk, and you need a structure for it. So we saw the opportunity there. We did the value streams, we did the trainings, and we wrote down, honestly, a narrative for the company on why do we go SAFe, what problems do we want to solve, what do we think will and can go wrong, what didn't work in the former format, and why did we decide on that. And we also got the buy-in from the leadership team of Roche Diabetes Care, including the CEO. We said, if mySugr goes SAFe and Roche Diabetes Care goes SAFe, those will be consequences. When it comes to the role of a manager, we really talked it through, and we got the buy-in and thought, okay, let's get it started. What were the big pros besides the problems we wanted to solve? Clear roles and responsibilities. That was really something that was, for me, painful. The translation between product managers, product owners on different sides. That super energy training. Also the possibility, a huge amount of people not have worked in Scrum before, to send them to trainings. We always did this internally, but how do you do this with 500 people in a timely manner? So that was a pro, and that's basically how we went. I also was searching for a long time, so what's the problem in SAFe? Why do people think it's waterfall with a lipstick of agile on it? And I couldn't find it. The more and more I looked, I saw similarities when it comes to things we did before. But there's one thing, and maybe that's something for the Q&A, where I think there's a key difference, at least how Spotify did their tribes, and also where I'm not sure if it's a problem on the long run for an organization, is the separation of SAFe between the network, so the teams, the agile product teams, Scrum teams, for instance, Kanban teams, and the agile release trains. That's what they call network, where all the trainings are about, where you can find a lot of material, and the functional hierarchy, the department. And they say the departments, the functional hierarchy needs to be the stable one. People are stable in the department, and they can support the transformation, which is true for a transformation, but for our case, it was not an agile transformation. And I'm not sure if this separation on the long run is good. What I know for sure is I would love to have the SAFe fellows also have trainings and more material on the functional part, because the people there also need trainings. Their roles change, and that is something that I miss from SAFe. And with that, I will highlight the superpowers that we identified, we reflected on, and thank you for your attention. And I'm open for questions, and leave the superpowers, if I manage, open maybe for the Q&A. Thanks.